Welcome.
Welcome.
Today we're going to talk about addiction.
Yes.
And we have a big definition for addiction. So that's where we're going to start today. You are listening to Magenta FM, Season 2, The Art of Mental Health.
We will bring some lesser known and some downright strange approaches to consider and explore.
We'll draw from our own experiences with healing and from our work helping others, plus our research into little-known fields of inner development.
We'll share tools and practices that help us heal and put the power and agency to heal back in our own hands.
This podcast and YouTube show represents the opinions of Rachel and Louisa. The content here should not be taken as medical advice.
The content here is for informational purposes only. And because each person is so unique, please consult your healthcare professionals for any medical advice.
We're talking about it not in relation to like chemical addiction. We're covering off addiction because it's the best word we've been able to find to talk about a phenomena in the soul that we can observe. And so we want to really lay out this definition for you so that you can use it as a tool in your life. It's kind of a fundamental idea in a development and spiritual development. So that's why we're going to cover it today.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about a definition of what is addiction, or what is the kind of addiction that we are discussing today. Then we're going to talk about why take on the hard work of freeing ourselves from addiction, because it is hard.
Yeah.
But worth it. So we're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
And then lastly, how do we begin to face our addiction as a first step on the path of healing?
Yeah. Yeah. We're going to cover it all.
Yeah. Okay. So let's start with definition.
So, I didn't actually look at the Wikipedia or PubMed or anything definition of addiction. I think we all know what that is, and we typically think about it in context of alcoholism or drug addiction. And we know that there are other kinds of addiction, but we generally think about it in terms of some kind of chemical, physiological addiction.
Yeah, that's like the most common understanding, I think.
Yeah. But we have a much broader definition. So if we go into a more nuanced understanding of addiction, there's a second layer we can talk about. The first layer is just a physiological addiction, like a chemical addiction.
Yeah,
and
like
then,
cigarettes,
yes,
alcohol, heroin, cocaine,
caffeine.
Yeah, the things that we know the body actually becomes chemically addicted to.
Yeah.
And that's not our terrain or expertise.
No. So that's about all you're going to hear from us about that. Yeah, exactly. And then the sort of next layer down is a different. You can't really call this a chemical addiction, except that I think there are descriptions of like the dopamine addiction, for instance. Like people talk about long distance running, being addicted to long distance running, and the effect of that, or fear, being addicted to terrifying.
Adrenaline.
Yes,
adrenaline
exactly.
junkie.
Yeah, exactly. Or sex, addicted to porn and sex addictions. And also Gabor Mate, he talks a lot. He's written this fantastic book called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, where he talks about all of these addictions. And he himself had an addiction to classical CDs. Shopping for classical CDs. Like multiple examples of the Beethoven symphonies. Like you need one great recording, but he had like 20,
and he would like compulsively go to the store, even if his wife was like in labor, or crazy stories like that. I think that one characteristic that I notice in these more broad, category of addictions is like a numbing effect or an escape effect. Do you see that?
Yes.
Like the escape of our phone.
Oh, totally. Like being addicted to the doom scrolling. Yeah. I mean, it's real.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I definitely observe, I can't really talk about myself in relation to a serious addiction. So I don't mean to imply that, but these things exist on a spectrum, and so my mild end of the spectrum, I may not notice it at the time, but I can look back and see my behavior and realize that I was I don't need to doom scroll, but I do when I need to like check out.
Yeah.
Or if there's something I don't want to face.
Yeah.
I definitely am more susceptible to my phone in those times.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we have a third layer, actually, which is the layer that Rachel, you and I are going to really get into today. Our realm is the broadest definition of all, and we're taking this word addiction and we're wanting to apply it to something that's difficult to access about the phenomena of the soul, but is actually at the heart of what's going on when we are stuck. And that is compulsion, the compulsive nature specifically of the shadow. So if you've been following our podcast, we have, just to give a quick definition, we talk about two, anatomically, we talk about two main sort of realms of the soul experience. You've got the realm of the shadow, which exists in the subconscious, where so much of our trauma and our beliefs and our non-cognitive style feelings really live. So when you wake up on the wrong side of the bed in the morning, and you do that on a fairly regular basis, and you're struggling with feelings of whatever it is for you, like for me it's self-pity, and for you it's irritation, right? And that's something that we're very familiar with. These are the rising up of the expression of the subconscious shadow realm.
Yeah.
And then the other half of this experience of the soul, anatomically speaking, is the light. And that is the part of us that experiences joy, that connects to our higher self, to our more spiritual nature. Mm-hmm. And the soul total is like the mediator between our spiritual reality and the reality of being embodied in a physical form while we're here. Mm-hmm. So here we are dealing with addiction, and this is the realm of the shadow.
Yeah.
So we have to reckon with the compulsive nature of the shadow acting out in us.
Yeah.
It is an addictive experience.
Yeah, and that word compulsion, I think, really helps when we talk about when we're looking at that second layer of these different behaviors. And you might wonder, well, those are all normal things. How do I know if it's an addiction or not? And it is that compulsive nature.
That's how you know.
That's how you know. If you just, we all have phones, and if you're using your phone out of a place of freedom and you're, not compelled,
right,
into whatever it is, escape, numbing, some kind of, high, then that is normal, normal
You're
behavior.
in charge in those circumstances. Yeah. But when you're not in charge is what we mean by compelled. This sub-nature, the subconscious quality of this compulsion or compulsive nature of the shadow, that's kind of what we're talking about when we talk about addiction. We're addicted to that. And let me just explain what I mean. So I love to use the example of self-pity because it's one that I'm just such an expert in that particular compulsive experience. I really so when you're in a place of feeling something like self-pity or rage or perfectionism, or you really have to, you have controlling tendencies with the emotional, if you grew up in a family where you managed people's emotions and just try and stop yourself from feeling those things and doing those things. It's impossible because of this compulsive nature of these wounds and these challenges that we face. Yeah. And so that's why, this is the only reason why we call it an addiction, is because we can't help it. Yeah. But there's more than that. We actually, my teacher, Dennis Klochek, used to say, we are in love with our wounds. We are in love with them. We have a very difficult time preventing ourselves from identifying with those wounds, and for justifying in our own minds, we're completely justified to feel the way that we feel and to behave the way that we behave. We just don't realize that we're not free in that. We don't have an objective point of view. And so that's the justification for this addictive nature of the shadow.
Hello, thank you for watching or listening to today's episode of Magenta FM. We want to take a moment and tell you that we have a lot of useful resources for you on our website at magenta.fm.
And actually, we want you to know that we're now regularly holding and hosting webinars. And in those webinars, we dive into some really juicy and challenging topics. We don't just do a bunch of downloading. We actually do exercises. We bring tools. We journal right there and then, and we do plenary, and of course, lots of Q&A. So you can go to our website at magenta.fm. You can sign up for the next available webinar, and we're holding those on a regular basis. So we hope to see you there.
And lastly, one of the best ways that you can support our show is by sharing it with friends or family
please.
Who you think might find it helpful or interesting. So you can just pause the show right now, text your friend a link to magenta.fm/podcast, and there they can see all the episodes and listen to the most recent one or one that jumps out at them. And we really appreciate your support.
Thank you so much.
Yes, and we are all dealing with it
Every
to some
single
degree.
one of us.
Exactly. So, if any of these examples resonate with you, don't feel ashamed or bad about yourself, because each one of us has some compulsion, some element of the shadow that shows up in our unique ways that takes over. And
hijacks us.
Exactly.
Yeah, and this is our lexicon.
Yeah.
We have to develop a shared language about how we understand these concepts. And sometimes, English is a very sort of pragmatic, prosaic language. It's not. It's hard to talk about these really profound, what in my world is a spiritual thinking, feeling, and willing. They are spiritual capacities that we have just in our thinking. Our thinking is a spiritual capacity. So is our feeling life. And so is the source of our will impulses, which is why the battleground is kind of a spiritual nature, the realm of the shadow.
Yeah.
These are intangible, non-physical. You cannot touch it. You cannot measure it. They are so, in a way, subjective. And yet somehow we have to create a science around this. We have to create some kind of structure, language, anatomy, lexicon around how we grapple in this inner, intangible, spiritual realm.
Yeah.
And so that's why maybe I don't need to justify it, but I kind of feel like I do, because people are like, well, that's not really an addiction. Well, it is if you think about what the definition of an addiction is.
Yeah. And what's coming up for me is actually the title of Gabor Mate's book, which is In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts.
Yeah.
And if you just pause and really think about that image, the realm of hungry ghosts, and that term has a lot of significance in esoteric pictures.
Yeah, a lot of pictures. Very powerful.
Yeah, exactly. So you may have a hard time like resonating with this definition of addiction. You're like, well, I don't like those feelings. I don't like to feel irritated. Speaking for myself. So how could I be addicted to the irritation if that's actually the opposite of how I want to feel? That doesn't really make sense. But if you can see how the irritation is actually it's showing up because it wants to like prove a point to me in a way, or it's this certain lens that I can just default to, even if it's not the full truth, the rational truth.
Yeah.
But it's like this hungry ghost, that's like looking for proof.
Never satisfied.
Looking for proof of, some deep belief or some, deep wound,
Yeah.
and that expresses itself as irritation.
Yeah, that word default, I think is a really good one, because we default to what we know how to do and how we know how to be inwardly. And one of the reasons why it's addictive, and the reasons why Dennis called it "we're in love with our wounds," is because we know who we are. At least we know who we are because what we do is we, in a way, we create an edifice of constructs that, you can take this pretty far and talk about personality constructs, and you can talk about what that looks like at a pathological level, like narcissism and so forth. But what we're really talking about here is we all have these ways that we understand who we are. And so what we do is we identify with that which is wounded in us as a part of who we are. And so you can imagine, if you let that go, then you don't know who you are anymore. At least I know who I am when I'm wounded.
Yeah. So like a self-pity example would be, you believe that you are a victim or poor me, and the world is against me. And so you latch on, that hungry ghost in you latches on to anything that could be proof of that.
Yes.
And then you sort of wallow in that.
Yes.
And then it's reaffirming, like, okay, yep, this is the truth. I'm right. I am a victim. The world is against me. And this is what I know. This is what I've always known. And it's defines yourself or your world or your personality, as you're, pointing to.
It's very comfortable.
Yeah.
And it's safe.
Yeah.
And in the crazy world we live in, safety is really important, especially if we grew up in unsafe conditions. Now, I didn't grow up in unsafe conditions. However, in a way, you don't need to in order to need that kind of safety.
We're kind of giving you a picture of like this much bigger idea of addiction and the addictive nature of the shadow.
Yeah.
And it is a lot. It's a lot. It's can feel like your whole reality or so much of your own reality.
Especially if you're struggling with depression or anxiety. These are states of soul that I'm just going to go on a limb and say they're very addictive, and it's very difficult to shift.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think that segues us into this next part, which is why even take on the work of healing these addictions in this term that we're working with. Like, if you're comfortable and you're safe in this reality of victimhood or irritation or narcissism or whatever that you've constructed this reality for yourself, and it feels safe, and the work of overcoming addiction is so great.
Yeah.
Why even take on this work? Why even try?
Yeah.
And we want to answer that question because there are good reasons to.
Yes. Yeah, and let's just begin by encapsulating it in one word, and that is freedom. And not freedom as in I can do whatever the hell I want, but I mean freedom in that you now have a choice about whether you go into self-pity. You actually have a choice. Or you have a choice about whether you're going to go into a depressive state. Can you even imagine what that would be like to choose whether you're going to get anxious or not about a situation, whether you're going to allow it to stress you out or not. And the implications are really huge. And I love to entertain the question of what if? What if I wasn't in a state of self-pity? What could I do instead? If you have lived in a depressive state most of your life or within the memory, right, in your memory, it can be really hard to imagine what that would feel like to not be depressed, to look out in the world and see, technicolor world out there, and to know what joy, levity, a real lift in the soul and expansion when you're chronically anxious.
Yeah.
What it's like to feel really expansive.
Yeah, and open-hearted.
Open-hearted, yeah. What is that like? And so freedom, for me, is freedom from compulsion. Like you have choice about what you feel. You can either feel self-pity or anger or rage or despair or shame, or you could feel reverence or joy. I love the word joy because I spend a lot of time in a depressive kind of state, and so joy has particular regenerative qualities for me if I can get into that state, peace, equanimity, a kind of a sense of dynamic relaxation, all within your soul. I mean, your body expresses, follows your soul wherever it goes. But being able to experience these things, what's another word? Like gratitude, like just living in a state of gratitude. The glass is half full instead of half empty. So there's something about freedom that not only gives you choices, but also helps you, I'm going to go out on another limb here, that helps you enter into the realm of the creative forces behind the world. And I'm going to call it love, or a kind of a sense of moral. You start to grow a moral imagination for the forces behind the world that are actually, love.
Yeah.
But you can't experience that if you're in a state of shame.
Yeah. You can't force it either. You can't just
No, it's like grace or
yeah.
not.
Yeah.
And so what freedom enables is a kind of a receptivity to other points of view. And so I think Buddha talked about this, his eightfold path was kind of all about this, which is cleansing the lens through which you look out into the world. Because so long as you are at the mercy of your shadow, you're seeing a distorted version of the world and also a distorted version of yourself.
Yeah.
You can't help it. You're addicted to those perspectives.
Another name that we have for that is the finished world.
Yes. Do you remember which episodes we talked about thought forms? Oh, it was one about anxiety. I think that was the second one
of season 2.
Yes. And then I think episode 7 in season 1, we talk about how we get addicted in our feeling life.
7 or maybe 8. But if you look for the title about feelings, understanding feelings like you never have before, that's all about the addictive quality of feelings.
Good job. That's impressive. Yeah. So thought forms or finished world. Yes. So this is what we're actually healing is the finished world quality of what we create to which we become addicted. The finished world. And the finished world is constructed of the thought forms that we have created, how we've internalized our experiences, what we believe, what we've concluded, the thoughts that we think, I'm going to call it addictively, but habitually maybe is another way to call it.
Yeah.
Like, this is the way the world is, or this is the way I am, or this is how people are.
Yeah.
Those kinds of thoughts that you think over and over again, and they're not really thinking, they're thoughting.
Yes, they're just
repetitive.
Exactly.
Yeah, like a stuck record.
Yeah.
We all have that going on. So that is where addiction shows up.
Yeah.
In our thinking life. In our feeling life, addiction shows up also in the kinds of feelings that we entertain, like self-pity. I just have to bring that one up because it's, one of my favorites.
Yeah, or irritation.
Irritation and disappointment. Yep. There's all kinds of...
And on extreme ends, rage or total shame spiral. It can be on the subtle to the extreme.
Yeah, and they're, as you can tell, they're pretty usually negative.
Yeah.
And they're what we call non-cognitive. They're not telling you anything about the world. They're just perpetuating. Those kinds of feelings are addictive. Just try to stop yourself feeling angry when you feel angry. You can't do it.
Yeah.
It has to wear off by itself. And then you can step out of it.
Yeah. Sleep it off.
Sleep it off. It's like, go walk it off, you know?
Yeah.
So feelings are very, very addictive. And in fact, the thought forms that we create always have feelings connected to them. And because feelings can be so addictive, that means the thought forms are very, very difficult. What we believe becomes very difficult to change because of what we feel about what we believe.
Yeah.
And those things together create the finished world.
Which is this reality that we mentioned in the beginning of the episode. It's like, it's the reality that we've created for ourselves internally and then mirrored to us externally, because we latch on to the bits of information that prove these thought forms, that prove these beliefs, or maybe we set ourselves up.
Yeah, that too. Yes.
We choose to surround ourselves with just the right people who are going to confirm what we deep down, that hungry ghost wants to believe.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, you may have trouble saying like, okay, well, I get angry, but I have all these people in my life that make me angry. And so it's really, valid, but it's like, there's some self-fulfillment and also some limited perspective that is bringing you to that conclusion of your belief and the accompanying anger.
Right.
And so if we can do the work of healing the addiction, and we'll talk a little bit about this, but that finished world can dissolve, and a world of possibility can emerge. Like a world where you are not the victim and you are powerful and capable, or a world where people don't let you down, but they show up for you and love you, and you experience community and support in ways that you previously didn't believe were possible.
Right. Yes. Yes. And so that leads nicely into one of the points that we wanted to say about this inner freedom. Some other outcomes or experiences you can have is when you're not driven by an addiction to being recognized or being seen, or to feel okay about yourself, or to feel like you are good enough. When you're not driven by these compulsive needs, which are perfectly fine. Like there's I definitely have been driven by the need to be seen in my life before. I mean, I was a musician, Why would people get up on stage in front of hundreds of people, not to make a fool of themselves, but to be seen and to be heard and to be recognized and to be special, right?
Yeah.
So I understand that, and it's not, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't mean to say that that's bad.
Yeah.
But imagine if you could meet that need in other ways that might be healthier for you.
Yeah. Or maybe being a musician is a healthier example than being a tyrannical boss, or
or a pathological liar.
Yes.
Because you're trying to get that need met that way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And being a musician can probably go either way, honestly.
It can be pretty dysfunctional. Yeah, but truly, that's right. It is a lovely. It can be a lovely way, so long as you are free.
Yeah.
And this is the key difference. If you have to have it as the only strategy you have, then you're not free. But if you have a need and you are fully cognizant of that need, and you're like, I have a need to be seen and to be heard. That's such a beautiful need.
Yes.
And it's such a healthy need.
Yeah, because you came to this earth with your unique voice, and you're supposed to be heard. Like, you're here.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to just be silent and invisible,
Right, exactly.
Like, you're here for a reason. So the need to be heard is fine and good and beautiful. And
we need to
we
hear
need it.
you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you're, as you're pointing to, if you're unconsciously trying to get this need met, or you believe you can never get this need met, then maybe you just talk over people all the time,
Right.
or you use your voice in these unhealthy, dysfunctional ways.
And you get the opposite.
Yeah, because no one wants to
instead.
listen to you because
Yeah.
you're shouting or you're, whatever,
Yeah.
behaving in a way that's not healthy because you're not acting out of your freedom.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is how this compulsive nature of the shadow can show up. So you got to understand there's a difference between need and strategy. The strategies we use to get our needs met. And when we're unconscious of what we need, or this sort of black hole in us of need, we're going to use strategies that are very usually unfortunate. And in fact, I have observed this over and over again. It's amazing to me, and I can't explain exactly why this is the case, but people will use strategies that get them the opposite of what they need.
It's so true.
It just is. It's true. You just go out there and observe it for yourself.
Yeah.
And I see this played out myself. I see it playing out in people I know, and also in all the clients that I've worked with. It was just a very consistent observation, reversal.
Yeah.
And so when we come to understand that we have an addiction, we have a wound, we are addicted to that wound, and the ways that we try and, because wounds always seek healing. Mm-hmm. So they will rise up, they will hijack us, they will express themselves one way or another, either through passive aggression or through self-fulfilling prophecies, or through whatever dysfunctional ways we end up by behaving, right? And the ways that we will behave are going to be the opposite of being able to get that need met. Because it's a fierce lesson that the wound is bringing to us. The shadow is saying, I'm here. You're not paying attention,
Yeah. So not only does the inner freedom allow you to get your needs met in healthy ways when they actually meet your need, but the world needs it because you can then be of service and you're not coming from a place of wound, which can look like, oh, I want to be of service, but you're really driven by your need for recognition and everyone in the room can smell it. And you... that just leads to like colonialism or other terrible ideas.
Exactly. Well, that example is, playing out at a large scale. All these NGOs, all these people who wish to serve and do good, go out there in the world, and what do they achieve? They achieve different forms of colonialism, which is a terrible thought, but there's lots of people who are writing articles about this. This isn't just my assessment. So this is a very important thing that you're saying, because this is another reason why inner freedom is so important, is because if you want to be of service in the world, know that until you face these compulsive addictive nature of the shadow, you can't really be of service really fully and in a free way, because you are driven by motives of which you are unconscious. Mm-hmm. For instance, the motive to feel good about yourself, or the motive to be recognized for your achievements in life, the motive for wealth and power, because that makes you feel like you're worthy.
Or the motive to stay small.
Oh yes, that's a good point.
Stay small
and safe, and not bring your jewels to the world.
And you could take this to just an even more macro level when we think about the finished world. So many of us want to see healing in our world that is in crisis and suffering on so many levels, ecologically, our economy, individuals, families. I mean, there's just so much suffering and destruction in the world, and people want to help, want to change things. They want to figure out something different. And that can be a very difficult thought exercise alone. How do we imagine something different? How do we imagine a different, economy and these power structures, not having the power they have anymore? It's so hard to imagine, but we first have to do this work of shifting the finished world within ourselves before we really have capacity to be able to shift the idea of the finished world, externally.
Yes. Yeah, and because these things are fractal in nature. They are. Just imagine that you and I, we have our own inner world, but imagine what is the inner world of us collectively like? There isn't a collective inner world at play. All you need to do is look at the house that we are in. Construction, right? It started in the inner world of imagination, to imagine the construction of the roads, and not only that, but the systems in which we exist, our bureaucratic systems, our social systems, everything. It has been created first and foremost in our inner world.
Yeah.
So if we want to make change in the world, if we feel called to do that, then the most efficient way there toward actually being of service is to do this inner work.
Yeah.
Because if you do that, you get to know the nature of this phenomena, not only on an individual level, but also at a collective level, because it is fractal in nature. And it will teach you a lot about why the world is the way that it is, and how we need to move forward. Your healing path, it's your healing is the world's healing, is your healing is the world's healing, not in some abstract way, but because your healing process and journey teaches you about the phenomena, and you got to get to know the nature of the medium in which you wish to work.
Yeah.
This is not just true in the arts, it's true in everything.
Yeah. Humanity. Working with people.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that is a good segue. I think we've made a good, strong case for why do the hard work of freeing yourself from addiction. And we needed to make that very strong argument before we talk about how we begin to face our addiction, because it can be a painful and laborious process.
Sure can.
But it is well worth it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about how do we begin to face addiction?
We could say that our entire podcast up until now has been all about this.
Yeah.
About how we face our shadow, which also requires us strengthening our light. So we've talked about this from the very first episode. So that's one thing to say.
Yeah.
But we're not the only ones talking about this. So Alcoholics Anonymous really does speak to, I think, a commonly held experience, which is, like I was saying earlier, this is a spiritual endeavor. Mm-hmm. Like, you can talk about inner development, but really inner development is spiritual development. They are very much the same thing. They should be the same thing.
Yeah.
Because we are spiritual beings, after all, having a physical experience at this time while we're together.
And neither of us have been in AA or in a recovery program, but we both know people who have, and you hear people talk about their recovery as a main significant part of their spiritual journey.
Yeah.
I hear it from from famous people who I follow and listen to, as well as just individuals that I know in my life, that their recovery path, the AA path or something similar, is a foundational aspect of their spiritual work.
Yeah.
So we bring that up not because we want to work in the realm of chemical addiction, but because it's a validating picture of the need for the spiritual approach and the spiritual development for healing our addictions.
Yeah, and what we mean by that is connecting to your higher self, and beyond that, connecting to spiritual realities, whatever that means for you. So I think it's just safe to say, at least in our language, which is kind of tricky because we have our own understanding of what we mean by these words, which we don't have time to get into, but just to say, if you have a spiritual perspective about what we're doing in this work, which is we are healing our spiritual nature, like the spiritual nature of the shadow.
Yeah.
And we're working in our thinking believe and what we're concluding and the lens through which we're assessing everything, we're healing that. And we're also healing our feeling life and how much we are addicted to negative feelings that are non-cognitive, that are destructive, that are non-generative, and learning how to have choice there. So there's that work. And then there's coming to understand our behaviors. Where are they compelled? Where are we continually going into coping mechanisms or avoidance or dissociation?
Yeah.
What's happening in what we do? And how do we trace that back to the source of our will impulses?
Yeah. And I think touching again or revisiting something that you mentioned earlier, which is that the shadow wants to heal.
Right.
And that's such a reframe from maybe thinking about your addiction as a nuisance or something, a monster, to that needs to be, cut off and expelled.
Right.
And that is a very natural impulse to want to get rid of the part of yourself that you
don't like, maybe.
Exactly. But it's showing up because it wants healing. There is some truth that needs to be seen and understood deep within the beliefs, the feelings, the behavior. So you have like this hungry ghost who, believes it's a victim. And so it wants to prove it's a victim. Right. And that's not the truth.
Right.
But there is a truth living within that hungry ghost of the victimhood that does need to be seen.
Yes. And acknowledged.
Accepted and acknowledged.
Faced. You're pointing to something really important. First of all, you said, let me just sort of emphasize it or reiterate it. This is tough stuff. And it's not easy to do, and don't beat yourself up because you keep falling back on Netflix or Jim Beam, right? Like, don't beat yourself up about this, because what you're running away from are some dark experiences, and they do very much feel and look like monsters.
Yeah.
But the goal of healing is not to, as you say, to cut them off or to deny them or to somehow expel them. Like Hollywood feeds us so many images of the expelling and the cutting off of the monsters. And this is a disservice, because these are archetypes, but really the healing gesture is not that. The healing gesture is redemption. And this is so important that we understand. This is really something I learned much more concretely from studying dissociative identity disorder through the work of these wonderful trauma therapists like Janina Fisher and others. And so what has been discovered in this trauma research is to dislike or to hate or to deny or to expel or any of those things. In other words, to hate, I think, those parts of us is not the answer.
Yeah.
And in fact, it just makes things worse.
Yeah.
And certainly what I've discovered in my very mild way compared to that is the thing to do is to wrap your arms around it in the ways that have this loving, compassionate, redemptive quality. And the only way you can really do that is to come to understand it.
Yeah.
So this brings me back to the fundamental imperative of cognition. This is the work of the higher self. When you bring cognition to play in this healing process, that is what makes redemption possible, because it's your understanding. And this is why you and I spend so much time on articulation. Yeah. Because that's how we bring to life our cognition. That's why we talk about journaling and we talk about all these different practices. Cognition
of understanding and also of the heart.
Yeah.
So it's if it's just a heady analysis, that's not it.
No, that's not it. Yeah, because we're wrong in the heady analysis.
Yeah.
unless because the heart, maybe we call it the thinking heart.
Yeah.
That's what needs to be activated because, that experience of, oh, I get it now. That aha.
Yeah.
It's not a heady thing. It's not an intellectual exercise. When you have that kind of landing, this illumination is what we're speaking to. And that word illumination is like you were suddenly illumined by light. That's cognition.
Yeah.
That's what we mean. Yeah, good call on that one. So understanding that the beast we're up against, it is a beast. Is an animal that we have to reckon with when it comes to these addictions, but they are seeking healing, and so let's give it to them.
Yeah.
Through our wrestling and our struggling and our striving to understand.
Yes. Okay.
All right.
I think that's a good wrap-up point. We'll just do a quick review that we talked about the definition of addiction and a broader definition of addiction from sort of a more commonly accepted understanding of, our compulsiveness with phones or, people's addiction to adrenaline activities or porn, these behavior addictions that are becoming more, commonly understood. But then we took it to even broader understanding in our way of looking at it, which is the shadow and the compulsive nature of the shadow that each one of us is up against.
Yeah,
and this is our work of our time, of our lifetime, and our era that we are born into. So compulsion is the common denominator here.
Yeah.
Then we talked about why take on this hard work of freeing ourselves from addiction, and that, the freedom that you can experience has implications not only for your life, for your experience, but also for having your needs met and then being able to meet the needs of our world.
Yeah.
And bringing the world into, toward healing, which so much of us long for.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we talked about how do we begin to face our addictions, and that this is a spiritual path.
Yeah.
And it's spiritual work, and we use the light of our higher self, or the light of our cognition, our thinking heart, to see and understand, understand the full nature of this hungry ghost, of this addictive quality of the shadow in us, to ultimately redeem it, not expel it, not punish it, but come to complete understanding, like the way as a mother, your heart just like opens up and just embraces your child in complete understanding, like, oh dear, I understand there's no ill feelings or judgment. And so that's what we are capable of if we build those capacities and take on this work.
Yeah, and it's a courageous work to face our darkness, but more than that, to put our arms around it. I mean, it's an astonishing thing, but man, there are some amazing stories out there of people who are doing this work.
Yeah.
So, that's what
you're not alone.
No, you're not alone. And there are some shining lights out there.
Yeah.
And some biographies that we can dive into and see how they've done it. And it's just like, damn.
Yeah.
But also the saints and mystics, that's what they do. And you often will see in, 400-year-old paintings depicting these saints, and you can see these little devil creatures, which had specific characteristics because they were expressing the particular temptations, addictions, that these particular saints were wrestling with and dealing with, and what they overcame.
Yeah.
And that they could turn those wounds and those weaknesses into gifts that they then able to give to humanity. That was their path.
Yeah.
That's what made them into mystics and saints.
Yes.
So that's, we just have to like become saints.
Become saints. Yeah. Take on the path of sainthood. Okay. Well, that's a very beautiful image. So thank you for sharing. And I think we should end it there, and
Thanks
we'll
for
see you next
listening.
time.
Yes. Thank you.